good.
Hey everyone! Hey, hush up! Hush up
today.
now! Hush up now, Will Harling. All right. Hey everyone! Welcome back to the Lookout. I'm here with a guy that always makes me smile and laugh, Will Harling, who he's got a huge grin on his face, even though there's a massive forest fire like right up the hill from his house, because he's learned to live with fire. There's millions and millions and millions of dollars have been spent on brochures that tell people how to live with fire. And Will's figured it out, kind of without many brochures even. So I think we should save our money on brochures and just send everyone to hang out with Will. But there's not a lot of parking where he lives. Anyway, we crack each other up. Anyway, I'm gonna real quick throw up my sponsor thing here because these guys are really important to our continued operation. We got QTAC making really nice slip-in units and full fire trucks. Great wildland gear made in Chico, California. We've got water axe pumps. Been cursed many times by frustrated firefighters, but they're pretty good pumps. And then
I'll take 3 of those right now, Zeke.
All right, yeah, we could use them today at Will's. And Firebox makes, Will could really use a Firebox today too. So let's see, let's go to Zoom here and get Will Harling up on the screen. All right, here's Will Harling on the lookout. What's going on over there, Will?
Oh, Zeke, so much. I can look out my window and see the Butler Fire creeping over the near ridge above my house. And it's it's a little intimidating. Today I was supposed to pick up my daughter after work. She's working for the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, but there was this big plume coming over the mountain that had, the cumulus cloud on top from the Butler Fire, and I kind of forgot about picking up my daughter from school and jumped in the car and drove halfway home before I realized that I had forgotten something and had to turn around and go back and get her. So it's a great opportunity to get fire back in that 2013 Butler Fire footprint 12 years later. Ideally it would have happened last year during the 2024 Boise fire, but unfortunately they went direct on that one and put it out. So
All right, so just for reference here, we've got this is Will's house, Butler Flat. This is the Butler Fire that you can see from his house right now. This is the Boise Fire that came up the backside of the ridge last year, and this is the Perch Fire from 2 years prior. And then out here is, let's see, got Will sitting up on top of my screen. I'll show you the Butler Fire. The green one is the Butler from 2013. So we've talked the last couple of days. Well, people on here have been appraised of the circumstance of what's happening over here, and kind of given us some background. And so, can you talk a little bit about what you guys are going to do in response here, like with burning your yard?
Yeah, over the past, I would say 25 years, we've been slowly building trust with CAL FIRE and the Forest Service. Look, you can see our prescribed burn from 2023 in that meadow. And you can see the blue polygon from the 23 SRF lightning complex there on the lower right.
Right there.
Yeah. When that fire kind of crowned out of the North Fork of Butler Creek in 2023, it sprayed embers all over that meadow, but we had just recently burned all the grass off. And so, we were able, even though there weren't any firefighters there at the moment, there were no spot fires. So that burn was done before that 23 Perch Fire even started. So it's kind of this is another step in that trust relationship with Siskiyou Unit CAL FIRE and the incident management team run by the Six River National Forest to allow our All Hands All Lands resources, which is, All Hands All Lands is an amazing program that brings together right now that includes the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, the Kuduk Tribe, the Cultural Fire Management Council, Humboldt Prescribed Burn Association, Salmon River Restoration Council, Watershed Research and Training Center, all these local groups coming together to help each other implement these grass burns to create defensible space for the summer wildfires. This just happens to be a burn that's happening, 2 days before the fire gets there. And so that kind of coordination is really important.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that you guys have been burning like right up. There's like cultural burns happening like 2 days from now downriver, right? And you guys burnt Shoshonic a couple days ago, so like you're in a decent window for prescribed fire, right? Even though we would consider this to be fire season and there's fires burning, you guys are actually in a good prescription.
Absolutely. I would say, there was one day a couple weeks ago when the Forest Service was burning a unit. The tribe was doing a cultural burn, and the All Hands All Lands team was implementing a burn all around the community of Orleans in the same day. So that, we're seeing the rebirth of that burning culture around here. And we've been trying to burn pretty much every day during the week. Sometimes we're able to do 2 concurrent burns like we did last week in Orleans, right across the river from each other, with 2 separate burn bosses. So it's been a really good spring, just capitalizing off that social license that we've built, over the past 25 years, doing 400 plus burns without having any of them get called in as a wildfire.
Nice. So when I refreshed my perimeter this afternoon, I could see these firing operations that are happening down the ridge. And so can you tell us a bit about like who's come up with the kind of the strategy here and what they're doing with putting fire on the ground out ahead of this fire up the hill?
Absolutely. I mean, I think people are familiar with the chief's letter of intent this year, which really focused on full suppression. And I mean, that's pretty much what the firefighters have tried to do with this fire. They asked for the resources to catch it when it was first detected. There weren't the Type 1 helicopters available to get this fire, and it was on a rocky ridge line in the middle of nowhere up there by Butler Mountain, and so it avoided initial attack. And so the next closest place is this fire line. You see those small polygons along that goes from Orleans Mountain all the way down to Northheimer Campground on the Salmon River.
So was that put in during the 2023 Perch Fire?
Yes, and it was refreshed the following year during the 2024 Boise Fire. So it's had a lot of work done on it. It's never actually seen fire from the north before. It's failed 3 times in the past with fires coming from the south, both I think it was the 77 Hog Fire, the Siege of 87 fires, and then again during the 2013 Butler Fire. So
just to jump out here, this is like, we've showed this a lot, but this is the fire history of the last 50 years in this country. There's been a huge amount of fire, and there's been a huge amount of firefighting. I mean, I think when you look at these polygons of fires, oftentimes every place you see the edge of that is somewhere that people like dug lines, and like you think of the amount of human effort that goes into that. A fire, and you zoom out at the landscape scale, and you're like, that's a lot of hand line and dozer line and mop up and cold trailing and everything else. I think one thing interesting, Will, about working with you guys, we came over, I had a project that Will helped fund through the Mid-Klamath Watershed MICWIC Council. And
good job, Zeke.
And I'm going to shine the spotlight on myself again here. Anyway, it's not what I wanted to do.
That was a wonderful project that we did with you, the fire overlaps project.
Wait, I'm talking about a different one. You've given us so much work I can't even keep track. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to share my screen again here. There we go. Historic fireland mapping. And so Will had some funding, and we, being map people, we had a lot of data from working on these fires, and we worked with a bunch of old timers, and we made a big map for them of all the historic places they tried to put out fires. And then the locals were good at contributing information on what had and hadn't worked. And so there's been, like Will said, this fire line that they're trying today has failed over and over and over. And we've said many times on the show that the box kind of stays the same. You have your, the topography kind of defines where your options are for putting fires out. And so we'll go back to these kind of major ridges over and over and over again because that's like the one place we can see that there's a fire line there already, or we think we can get in there and go up that fire line. But when you look at like the complexity of this terrain, and you imagine, putting fire on the ground and then having the interplay of all your up canyon winds, your down canyon winds, and everything else on these crazy non-linear kind of ridge lines, you can see why they fail. And so that's one of those places where the project we did with Will was really, I thought, important because they put in that input. Because if you just have a map and say, here's historic fire lines, the next team that comes in, they're like, oh, there's a whole historic fire line, let's use it again. And it's like, well, the locals might tell you, oh, that failed in 77, and that failed in 82, and that failed in 93. And so, trying to capture and pass on that knowledge has been, I think, one of the big challenges for MCWIC, right? Like, you get it. And I was happy to see so far you don't have a Type 1 team on this fire. Can you talk a little bit about that, about why it's nice to have this be a local team?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to bring it back to the 23 SRF Lightning Complex, we did have, I believe it was a Type 2 team at the time, or maybe even a Type 1 team. And you get folks who are in charge that are from out of area and, don't understand fire on this landscape. And so, unfortunately, we had a branch director on that fire that was convinced that that fire was going to be hung up in Butler Creek, even when the inversion lifted. And unfortunately, he was sorely mistaken, even though I begged him to grab that fire and bring it to the fire line while the inversion was in place, while it was safe. And it put all of our homes here at risk. And so really it means a lot more risk when we have people who are able to call the shots, who aren't grounded in decades of understanding and learning fire in this complex fire environment. And so when we have a local Type 3 team, they understand fire on this landscape. They've spent their careers here, or they have relationships with people, and there's trust between us. And so, they just went through the incident strategic alignment process where they try and, figure out what are those critical values at risk. What is this fire? How is it going to play out across the landscape? Where are those opportunities to minimize the impacts to those values at risk? And how do you, do that messaging both internally within the team and then also externally with the partners? So, to do that with a local team is a lot of work, and I understand why a lot of forests will shop it out to a national team. But there's a loss for the land and for the community when that happens. So just a big shout out to the Six Rivers for taking this on. And I think it's a really sound decision, because this is a finite landscape. If you look at the suppression difficulty index and the potential control lines for this landscape, it's basically a hemmed in 20,000 acres. And if they are able to hold it on that Northeimer to Orleans Mountain line, it'll only be about 6,000 acres before it bumps into that recent perch fire footprint and is able to be held on that line. And if not, then it's only another 13,000 before it bumps into the recent Boise fire and then the 2020 Red Salmon Complex. So if we can have this fire burn to its perimeter of recent wildfire footprints, before the real heat of the summer, you're going to see a lot of beneficial landscape effects. That forest will be way more resilient into the future. And I think this is a unique opportunity where the best fire suppression, full suppression strategy is also the best ecological fire management strategy. You know, and
You're
that's
saying
really,
you're saying keeping it in this box here.
yes. I mean, well, they're either going to hold it on that ridge, which is going to prevent the slope reversal coming up out of Lewis Creek, which
Hmm.
could throw embers further south, and kind of they would be playing that catch-up game ridge to ridge.
This is Lewis Creek out here you're talking about?
Yeah. No, it's where the fire is going into now.
Here, right here.
Yeah, so that's
Okay, so
Lewis
you're
Creek.
saying that they're putting heat up in here, so when this gets down to the bottom of the gully and makes a head run up here, it'll hit this buffer they've already put in.
Yes,
That's what you're saying, okay.
They will have good black off that ridge, and they'll potentially be able to catch it at 6,000, which 6,000 acres of good fire is a win for the landscape. And if they aren't able to hold that, then it's going to be backing down that next ridge, and then they could think about doing strategic, defensive firing on that next ridge to prevent, the same head runs that would, cause more severe fire impacts.
So when we look at the green here, the area that burned 12 years ago, how did that fire unfold? Like, what areas of this kind of head fired versus backing? Like, can you describe a little how that fire went down?
Yeah, I mean, you can see the patterns if you go to Trip Point, which is kind of on the lower right of your screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the fire originated. I was on initial attack. Actually, I was up on that hillside trying to cut line around it when this bear came barreling down the P line I just made and grazed my ass as it went flying down the hill and out of there. Yeah,
So it kind of went up this way?
if you go a little bit lower down to the right, you'll see those stringers of trees. Now, a lot more of that hillside used to be in Douglas fir, but pretty much every afternoon that fire would get blown up canyon and just take out another swath of trees.
Okay, so you're talking about like these
Yeah.
strips of high severity.
Yeah, and so that you see that pattern throughout this fire where it kind of, just every time when we got into the high burning index time of day, it was crowning out and heading up to the ridge and throwing spots.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and I think we've talked on here about how the pyro diversity creates biodiversity, and that especially you really notice these patterns like when you drive Highway 299, where you start to really get a picture of that up and down canyon exposure. So the wind blowing up the canyon in the afternoon hits these kind of down canyon facing slopes, and you get high severity where you've got that kind of combination of up canyon wind, slope getting sun, and fire at the bottom of the hill. And conversely, if you get big night down canyon winds, you get the same effect, like a run like up here, right? Like stuff that's facing up. You can get it both ways, but that's always, for millions of years, that's been a feature of these landscapes, right? That you have those kind of parts of the landscape that are aligned in the peak of the day and the peak of the night. It really decides where trees should grow there.
Yeah, 2013 Butler Fire. It was a cultural phenomenon. When the team finally made it to Butler Flat, we had about 50 locals there who had already put in a 1.5 mile fire line along an old mining ditch and pretty much had it plumbed and ready to do the defensive firing when the team showed up. We had a pirate radio station there. It was a really incredible event, and we kind of reached this understanding with the incident management team where we built a lot of respect with each other. We respected their rules and eventually just stayed close to the structures and kept accountability of the community volunteers. And then we had a big kind of opportunity to learn from each other how we saw fire on that landscape, and that became a powerful experience for then Klamath National Forest Supervisor Patty Grantham, who made these really cool silkscreen shirts to commemorate that event. Most of those shirts have disappeared because they've melted off our backs, working and
Well,
subsequent.
yeah, and I'd say it's definitely an improvement. I was my first experience really working the Klamath was 2008, and I still have my beat up cluster FUCK complex T-shirt, which I treasure. But it's the only fire camp T-shirt I've ever bought, and but I was there, and I remember like hearing in the plans trailer like, oh yeah, they just demobbed the Reeds, the Bill Tripp and Will Harling. Those guys were telling the ICs what to do, and they just got demobbed. And I was like, oh, I know Will Harling. So we kind of been there through the watching. Well, we think we were there on the dance fire, the Orleans fire, and then we thought we were going home, and then they're like, oh, someone just lit off the entire Salmon River, and so we spent the summer there with you guys.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting to watch that kind of the maturing of that relationship, right? And to hear it from both sides, like, oh, those guys, they think that because their grandmother lit fire the whole, ever since the beginning of time, they somehow like know more about fire. And some people that are my friends were saying stuff like that. I'm like, well, they actually do. You should listen to them. And so it's been nice to see, but I feel like we've gone backwards. So like, where's Patty now? When we've got people that are seriously making the wrong calls. It's really frustrating to me in my career to see that we've gone so backwards with, early in my career we had fire use teams, and we had, the Forest Service can't even say the word resource benefit anymore. They can't. If we do manage to get some fire on the ground for resource benefit, they're not going to tell that story. They're going to say, we put that fire out the best using the combination of firefighter safety and resource lacking. We had to go indirect. So frustrating, man. Just to try to message for them. What happened? I just lost something.
No, you're so right. I mean, I really was hoping that the 2023 SRF Lightning Complex, where we met that fire at about 20,000 acres, and then through strategic firing operations took it to a 50,000 acre footprint. And I think what was unique about that is it wasn't in the backcountry, it was into my backyard from the other side of the creek. And it did a lot of good for this forest because it was a really wet summer. And we got 30,000 acres of really good fire on the ground. And we worked very well with the incident management teams. And the chief's letter of intent that year gave us the flexibility to do that. Now, I thought it was interesting in this year's letter of intent, there was a little window for those communities where there was acceptance of managed wildfire. It puts our line officers in a really tough position now with kind of the, who's looking over their shoulder at the decisions you're making. And so that's where I think, we're really kind of lucky this year that they, doing full suppression on this fire also kind of aligns with, beneficial fire on that landscape. It's not that they're trying to get beneficial fire, it's that those two strategies are somewhat in alignment. But you're so right. I mean, every publication isn't necessarily talking about the benefits to the land. It's talking about firefighter safety. It's talking about saving taxpayer money. It's talking about putting it out as quickly as possible. So we've got a lot of work to do, brother. It was, we started on this 25 years ago, and we haven't gotten very far. Yeah, I think. Well, I would say we've gotten far.
We've gotten very far, but I think rolling out your example, so we're not just like, I'd like to be having this conversation in like every different forest, right? That there's a fire coming and we're going to do a prescribed fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's how we make change, is that we show these common sense solutions that work, and we ask why not. And we today in that ISAT meeting, we asked why not, and I was honestly surprised as we went around the circle from the agency administrator to the IC to the local FMO. They've seen us burn. They know us, that we're a known entity, and they were, we were able to address their concerns with real world solutions, and recognizing that they have their hands full, that we're not going to be a burden on them, that this is going to be additive. And it was so great to hear the IC say, hey, you get rid of all those dry fuels before the wildfire gets there, you're going to make our job easier.
Right.
And that, I think that's what's going to shift fire on our landscape, is that, the fire suppression resources working hand in glove with the prescribed fire folks. I mean, not that we're necessarily sharing resources, but that we're collaborating, we're coordinating our plans so that when, things can work, we do it. I mean, we had 2 additional burns planned upriver this week, but that issue was, it was up a 1-lane, narrow, winding road that could be closed by wildfire. And, we're not going to go burn up there if we can't go check our units the next day.
Yeah.
If we get a boulder or a big tree across the road. So, it's us respecting their constraints, and understanding operationally, how they need to fight this fire in a good way. And them respecting the expertise that we bring to the table. And so, just kind of fast forward from those early days where they're like, who are these guys that think they know how to burn out here?
Right.
Part of it was also us gaining respect for, that, those fire dogs that and love, that actually know fire on this landscape, that know how to do a real solid burnout that actually holds, or that, does what it was intended and doesn't do too much.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great seeing the kind of overlap, and to like hear that you guys locals are like helping bring fire down the ridge during a wildfire. That you've learned how to play in that arena, and that it's taken 20 years, but like, okay, now like we've actually got quals in their systems. We've kind of jumped through the hoops.
Yeah, Lenya Quinn Davidson and I, we always banter with each other. She's like, you don't need quals, you just need pickups and, 100-gallon tank in the back of your Ford and a bunch of locals. And, up here, 97% of the landscape is federally managed. And if we're going to play that game on the federal landscape, we have to, be able to play in that world. And so we don't have the luxury as on the more private landscapes where you can do the PBA model and do a lot of good work. And so, this is also tribal land. This is Karuk ancestral territory. They never gave up the rights to this place, And so we also see that, we play by the rules of the federal government. Well, we also play by the unwritten rules of the Karuk people. And I think that's where the magic has happened up here, is that, by respecting those 2 systems, we're starting to turn the corner on landscape scale fire management. And, your fancy GIS work at strategic points along our path has helped us get there. It helped us conceptualize for people in a more real way, a simple way, what frequent fire means on the landscape. For me, having this fire burn through that massive snag patch from a poorly placed burnout during the 2013 Butler Fire means I don't have this ticking time bomb right above my house, that if that burned in a hotter, drier year, it would burn down my home. I can't afford fire insurance. So This fire burning down to my house right now, hopefully, the weather gods cooperate here, is going to be, that's my fire insurance for the next 10, 15 years.
All right. Well, I think Zoom's going to kick us out here.
And my partner and my kid just got home from the river, so perfect timing, Zeke. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about the magic. And we're going to be filming the burn tomorrow. It's going to be a community experience. We'll probably, have 40 or 50 folks. A lot of fire qualified folks, and a lot of folks of this place, neighbors and landowners, and the PBA mashup with all hands all lands.
So you gotta keep it in the grass. You're not gonna go up into your tan oak stands.
I think we're gonna let the wildfire do the tan oak. We'll keep it in the grass tomorrow.
Nice. All right, well, keep us posted. Thanks for coming on the lookout. And if you guys want to learn more about Will, we've got search Will Harling on our YouTube channel. We've done a bunch of stuff with Will, a fire brother from another mother. Both of us raised by hippie wolves in the wilderness.
Where we found our love of fire.
Oh, a squirrel is very into biochar, and she's asking if you're familiar with biochar and if you could comment on biochar.
Yeah, I don't think we should be robbing biochar from the woods. They're needed out there. I think we should do prescribed fire and let the charcoal that remains be washed into the streams, deposited on the floodplains, and grow the 8-foot diameter trees that will eventually fall over and aggrade our incised streams again and recharge our aquifers. So I think biochar is great, and there are some industrial applications, but overall, keep it in the forest. It's doing good out there.
That's my feeling exactly. All right, well, love you, Will Harling. I'm going to kick you out, and we're going to get on with our lives here.
Love you too, brother.
See you, dude. Bye. Okay. You're right, people. Okay, I need a drink of water. Thanks, everyone, for coming on. We're going to keep going. I just need to catch up here on my hydration. I got 3 empty water bottles. So I guess I'm just going to have to suck it up, people. Why don't they dip into the lakes? I don't know. Hey, Beasley, thanks for coming on, brother. Okay, so that's Butler. If you're just joining us, you can go back and watch that episode with Will Harling. And we've also got, like I said, a bunch of stuff with Will. Will's been a real leader in this kind of getting fire back to the people. Klamath River, they're doing a lot of good stuff, and we'll keep talking about them as much as we can. Gotta just do a little housekeeping here on my map, and we'll do a little more kind of another quick overview of what we just talked about. So here we are on the Butler Fire. Butler Fire is burning in the middle of frickin' nowhere. Out here, if you go Redding in the middle, you go up to Happy Camp, which is like also the middle of nowhere, and Podunk 30, but it is like the town for 50 miles. Anyway, if you head past Happy Camp down to Orleans, right before you get there, you hang a right at Soames Bar and go up the Salmon River, and this is some wild and woolly stuff. If you want to take the shortcut from Soames Bar to Callahan, you're up for an adventure. It's a good drive. So anyway, lots of fire over here. People know a lot about it who live there. Will lives right here in Butler. I've been going over there and burning with Will for the last 12 years, helping teach prescribed fire trainings. And they've really built a culture there around fire. They've had a lot of funding from CAL FIRE, from Forest Service, from lots of different people to get good with fire. And so, as we were talking about, here's his house, Butler Fire. We've been watching it. It's doubling in size every day. And the Forest Service, their strategy for containing it is they've got crews out that are starting to light fires off this ridge line where there's a fire line that's been kind of established for a long time, but reestablished during this fire and this fire in 2023, 2024. They're lighting it with the idea that when we get our slope reversal, which you guys, if you're on yesterday, learned that term, this fire's back down into the bottom of this drainage, and now it's going to run up this drainage. And it's been moving nice and slow because it's working against gravity. But now it's going to take some runs up here, and this firing that they're doing along this ridge is an attempt to reduce fuels along this fire line to see if it'll hold once this fire comes cooking out of there. No guarantee that's going to happen. If it doesn't, as Will was saying, this whole, sorry, Zoom's still messing with me. this whole area here is contained in a lot of ways by fires that have happened in the last 5 years. So you got the Red Salmon Complex, the Boise Fire, the Perch Fire. So it's in all likelihood, if the fire does get out of this box they're building for right here, they don't expect it to go into the Perch Fire because that all burned 2 years ago. It's going to burn out to natural barriers, and that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because this landscape, having burnt 12 years ago, is kind of in its natural return interval for another fire. So that's Butler. Okay. Yep, I got notes on each screen that says show the map, but oftentimes I get blind. That's the Butler Fire. Keep you posted. It's going to go for a while. Will's, as we said, they're going to do a community-led prescribed burn around their neighborhood tomorrow to make it safe, so there's no fine fuels when the fire gets there, as it will. Over here's the Jacket Fire. As far as we know, it hasn't spread. We're going to come up here now, just maybe 15 miles away, to the Summit Fire. These green and blue polygons you're seeing are the historic fire extent. And so this area burned in 2014. And as we were just talking about with Will, just because an area is inside, a fire scar, it doesn't mean that the fire killed all the trees. Fires burn with all kinds of different intensities as they move across the landscape. Sometimes they're running up a hill, sometimes they're backing down it. Sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it rains. Sometimes they're running up the canyon with wind behind them and in the full sun, and then when that happens, you get these patches of high severity. And this stringer of trees that survived here, in a lot of ways, that just might be a result of like it being cooler down in here and moisture. So when this fire did move up the canyon, it kind of split either way, and the fire kind of flanked into these trees here. What we've seen on this fire is the Summit Fire started down in here, and they fought it for days trying to keep it small, and eventually it boiled up out of there, spotted across the top of this drainage. And as far as we know, the fire, they've contained these spots that are on the other side of the drainage, and now they're working on containing this flank of the fire. One of the big objectives here, one reason they want to contain this wilderness fire, is that this area to the north hasn't burned for a long time. You've got this kind of hole here in what we call the mosaic of fire history, where you've got fires all over the place, in a lot of places more than one. You've got this whole area here that hasn't had fire in 100 years due to successful fire suppression. So the worry is definitely that if this fire gets over the divide, if it gets out into here, becomes well established, it could eventually cause problems down here in Fort Jones, and it'll smoke people out here in Scott Valley. Anyway, the Forest Service, they could have an opportunity to manage this fire. They've got crews, they got resources right now. They could just establish a line along the top of this drainage and manage the fire in this burn scar to reduce fuels, etc. But the mantra this year is full suppression. The direction from above is don't talk about resource benefits. Don't think about resource benefits. Put the fire out as small as possible. And so that's the kind of political context for all these decisions. Christina Kurtz says she'd like to understand why they don't do repeated dips into the lakes. I don't think that they don't do that, but if you have more info, some places they don't because there's rare fish or rare frogs, but in general, I haven't heard of them not dipping in these lakes here. But I'm if someone wants to correct me, I'm open to being wrong on that. All right, so just the other thing that we've talked about with the context of the Summit Fire is that this all burned last year, and so that creates a kind of a buffer between this fire and Etna. This fire's been somewhat continually active. If we look at the Fort Jones camera for this afternoon, see a lot of smoke billowing up out of the area where the fire's happening, but what we don't see there is a column. We don't see big giant mushroom cloud coming out. And that's because the fire has already kind of made its big run. Right? It hauled to the top. Now it's a backing fire. It's a gentle fire. This fire is doing good work out in here. When you see a fire that's only moving, like 200 yards every 12 hours, that usually tells you that it's doing a good job moving along the ground, burning up stuff that needs to get burned up. So if we don't, by keeping fire out of this landscape, if you have little baby trees, it's a 12-year-old burn, if you got regenerating trees out in here, etc., oftentimes they're denser than we want them to be. And letting a fire back through here, it's going to kill the smallest trees, and the seedlings, the most vigorous 12-year-old seedlings, are going to survive the fire. And that's how forests get to the density they need. So really, by keeping fire out of this landscape at this time, 12 years after a burn, the Forest Service is basically screwing up future conditions. You're going to get like thickets of trees in here because they haven't been thinned by fire. And then you're going to have another fire in the future. It's going to burn up out of here, headless drainage. It's going to kill everything. You're just going to have like brush fields. So the best thing that you could have happen on this landscape right now would be for this fire to kind of back its way around and slowly burn out this whole head of this drainage in the area that all burned in green here in the last 12 years. But that's politically kind of impossible, obviously, so full suppression is what we get. So that's Summit. We're going to jump out and talk about a different fire. And I know that I often sound like a broken record on this stuff, but I have to talk a lot because the Forest Service isn't saying what needs to be said. And so there you go. Also, I have to repeat these things over and over because there's not a lot of big, new, fancy news on these fires because they're really not going crazy. A squirrel, you're crazy. These biochar folks. I hate to talk smack, but biochar is like this cult. And people that are really into biochar, like they want to evangelize and talk about how it's the secret to the problems of the forest, without real consideration to like the scale of the problem. And Squirrel over here has been trying to convert me to biochar evangelism for like 4 years. Okay. Green fire. All right, I'll turn off the chat here. I don't want to see it. Okay. I can't really watch the chat and think, so I'm not going to respond to chat right now. What's new on the green fire is about the same thing that's been happening. What has happened on the green fire in the last day is that a complex incident management team took over. So it's kind of like the big league fire managers. And so up until now, it's been running with local resources, and the shot soup that was on this fire on initial attack kind of was working as the ops chief. So he's been running around coming up with a plan. As you can see from the mapping, this is like another 12 hours of spread on the fire. It's pretty much doing what we've been seeing, is that it's kind of flanking and backing. And we've been waiting for it to make that slope reversal, for it to get down the creek. There's been some helicopter work slowing down this flank because they want to have time. As soon as the fire kind of becomes more slope driven, burning out in this drainage, it's going to be starting to push on their window of time to get a dozer line prepped and snagged and ready to fire this major ridge system. And so water drops right now are focusing on this. As far as we can tell, the main objective still is to contain the fire on this ridge if possible. In the big picture kind of plan for this fire, they want to keep it to the west of Fender's Ferry Road. So forgot to kind of start you out wider, but here's Redding down here. Here's Bernie up here, and Round Mountain, Montgomery Creek. And Fender's Ferry Road goes across this country, across the McLeod River, brings you out over by kind of Lakehead. So open question right now is if the Forest Service is going to let this side of the fire burn out onto this peninsula where it's surrounded by water. That would be about 13,000 acres. They've done a bunch of prescribed fire out in here, and so the conditions out on the end of this peninsula are ready for another fire, a low severity fire. And so just like in the Klamath, this landscape is ready for fire, needs fire, and is currently getting fire under good conditions. It's not clear if they have that many good options for containing this side of the fire, given that we're going into a kind of extreme heat wave in Redding, and we're likely to get down canyon winds at night, which is when we like to do firing operations. So we talked about that a bit. Not much has changed, except I reached out to the PIO yesterday for the forest, and he said what we just talked about with Will. Strategy is full suppression. That's what they have to say. But full suppression or not, there's an indirect strategy that's going to box the fire in and tie it into the shoe fire up here. So looking at the webcams for this fire, this is the Round Mountain camera looking at last 3 hours, say. Same with this, we haven't got a column on this fire. One of the reasons for that also is its backing, but also the fuel type. So if we come in and look closely at this landscape, and we've talked about this before, there's a ton of oaks. There's some conifers in here, but there's also like a huge amount of black oak. And that black oak really kind of retards fire spread. And if this conifer is Doug fir, the Doug fir needles are really short and compact, and they don't make a very flammable fuel bed for surface fire spread. So you got a ton of oak and Doug fir out in this landscape, and it doesn't create, it's not like ponderosa pine where you got this like stack of dry straw. So even if this fire starts to do some slope driven runs, we're going to expect kind of a patchy severity. It's influenced a lot by the black oak, and especially once you get up in these higher elevations on the kind of poorer soils, ton of oak out here. It's really hard to kill oak with anything except kind of an extreme crown fire. So our prediction here, fire's going to cross the creek. You're going to get some slope driven runs, fingering. It's going to kind of take out individual basins. If we get kind of sustained winds, which aren't forecast during this kind of hot, dry spell, you could have longer kind of sustained runs. But absent winds, you got kind of a train-driven fire, and we'll be interested to see the shape of it. So far, still, this. I think once it starts to slope, reverse, and burn here, we'll have a better idea of how much time they might have to get their strategy implemented. Interestingly, the control box on the west side of the fire is this creek. I think that may just be because there's only one road out in here, and that road is kind of, it's not a great situation here to try to hold a fire on super steep ground on a mid-slope road. And so I think they're backing off to this creek here, just as a contingency in case they can't hold it on this road. Because once the fire gets out kind of here past this road, they really have very few control options. But they have the lake, right? So it's kind of a complicated piece of ground. It's a big piece of ground. And that's why we said a couple days ago, this fire is going to be with us for a while. And it's going to smoke. There's going to be smoke impacts from this fire. Today was kind of a dynamic day in Northern California, far Northern California. Farther north, we had some really big thunderhead buildup. You can see the smoke from this fire is kind of laying out and filling into the north. So this is kind of looking up towards Bernie from the fire over here. If we look kind of from down by Hayfork down the Mendocino National Forest, we see there's just no buildup at all. And then off here in the distance, you can see kind of now we're looking up to the north and northeast. You can see big clouds and kind of distant thunderheads. If we snoop up here up to Herd Peak, which is just kind of southeast of Wairika, here we're looking out to the northeast, and they had a pretty substantial cell that was moving through. You can see some rain from that. And then as you get over more towards Shasta, it stayed dry. So there were some lightning strikes today, and they were kind of concentrated. This is looking from up by Wairika. Here's Mount Shasta. So if we pan over, you can see the smoke from the summit fire, but like really no buildup in that whole quadrant. But that it was really active, kind of going up towards like between Big Valley and Oregon border. So I just love these kind of big picture views. And so, like we said, one thing that could kind of affect how these fires get fought is availability of resources. And when it comes to that, any new strikes that are kind of outside of the core rain areas here will likely start new fires. And we've been talking about how Type 1 helicopters, Type 1 crews get sent to new starts. So that might affect the outcome on the green fire. It's just that you can see a lot of lightning kind of moving here from like Tennant up towards Ashland, and then really a lot of lightning now over Mount Ashland and into Medford. Type 1 crews and Type 1 helicopters are national resources, and so that just means that they get dispatched out of Boise. So even if you have a Type 1 helicopter, parked in Chester, it doesn't mean that the last national force gets to decide where it goes. It's going to go where we have new starts, and it's going to go where we have threats to communities. So those are some of the reasons. Even if the Forest Service wants to put out the green fire, they just might not have the kind of elite or kind of premium resources they need to get out here and do a major firing operation in this really broken ground with really limited access, just because those resources are valuable and they're going to get sent to the places where they're going to do the most good, which is on initial attack. When we get to weather, one of the things that's kind of right in our faces here is this is the 14-day forecast for Redding, and every day there's 12 days out of the next 14 that are over, the 100 or 2 are over, and Friday through Monday 108 every day, 106 on Thursday. So that definitely, we've been talking about that and how that will affect this fire, how that might affect the down canyon winds. So that's the heads up. This image is pretty good. You can see this huge storm development that's happening this evening, kind of starting in Northern California and moving up into kind of the Applegate Valley and southwest Oregon. On that, you can see the smoke from this fire here. You can see the smoke from the green fire kind of getting pushed out to the northeast. And something that happens that's a real watch out situation with these big giant thunderstorms is that it takes a lot of energy to keep all that moisture and everything aloft. And when those storms when the sun goes down or when the storms kind of run out of energy and collapse, you get strong outflow winds. And those can be like extreme, not real long duration, but they kind of come out of nowhere and they're like a good, a crazy heavy blow that maybe lasts, less than half an hour. And that's what killed all the Granite Mountain firefighters on the Yarnell fire. They can move, 100 miles. So anytime you got massive storm like this in proximity to existing fires, it's a heads up situation for outflow winds. Okay, so that's about it. Want you guys to check out as always, want you to check out the Lookout website. We'll post this up there. Want to thank Will Harling for coming on the show, and thank you all for being supportive. I'm not going to do any of the comments. I got to run. I'm going to play the sponsors, and then we're going to go make some sausage, actually. Thanks to WaterAxe, thanks to QTAC, and thanks to Firebox for really making this happen. Thanks to all you who are members of the Lookout.